Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Suzio of GeoDataVision.
Good morning, Dean. Spring is approaching fast and the temperatures are changing, the birds are chirping, and the days are getting longer. So what great topic did you bring to the discussion today?
Hey, Len, it's great to see you. And yes, I'm getting excited for spring for sure. Today, I thought I'd address a recent joint statement from regulators on elder financial exploitation.
Well, that certainly is a great topic. Fraud as a whole continues to be a very hot topic. And of course, seniors are considered as easy targets. So I can't wait to discuss this topic today.
Yeah, I agree. Fraud is major.
Mhm.
In fact, I got hit just recently. I get hit all the time, but I just got hit recently myself with a fraudulent type of transaction, a little different from what I'll be talking about today, but that's a result of my online exposure, as you can imagine. But the criminals are using, artificial intelligence to analyze online data in an effort to identify vulnerabilities and, of course, to infiltrate protected data. So it's pretty scary. I'm very glad that regulators are honed in on it and continue to issue guidance to financial institutions. So I think I'll jump into the guidance.
Well, that's a great idea. And I'm particularly interested because you not only have a professional opinion about this, but you obviously have sounded to me like you've been a victim of fraud attempts as well. So let's hear it, Dean.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's start in, the interagency statement on elder financial exploitation was issued in December of 24 by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and, of course, the CFPB, the Federal FDIC, the NCUA, the OCC, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and, of course, state financial regulators. So the statement provides supervised lenders with examples of what I call good, sound risk management and other practices that will help combat elder financial exploitation. The statement does not replace any previous guidance on the subject issued by any of those agencies, and it does not interpret or establish a compliance standard, and does not impose any new regulatory requirements or establish new supervisory expectations. But it's certainly great guidance, and I think most institutions should adhere to this guidance, and for sure. But it's intended to raise the awareness and provide strategies to financial institutions for combating the elder financial exploitation, consistent with the applicable legal requirements that are already established.
So, Dean, what does the guidance outline?
Well, then, let me highlight some key points for the guidance. The first one is, governance and oversight. It encourages the financial institutions to implement risk-based policies and internal controls to protect seniors from financial abuse. So again, that's a proactive approach that everybody should take. Employee training recommends continuous staff education to detect the suspicious transactions and recognize red flags of elder fraud. And, to me, that is a real important element because, the more that we're aware of the types of activities that are occurring, the better off we'll be to assist those elders. Transaction holds and delays. There are rules out there now under Reg CC and other regulations that help, but it describes the legal frameworks that allow the institutions to delay disbursement of suspicious transactions. Trusted contacts. Advocates for customers that designated a trusted individual to be alerted in the case of suspected exploitation. And of course, those people have to be properly vetted as well. Suspicious activity reporting under BSA AML rules. It highlights the financial institution's responsibilities to report suspected fraud in law enforcement. Law enforcement in reporting, encourages institutions to report suspected cases of adult protective services and law enforcement agencies for better intervention and recovery efforts. So, getting to know your local law enforcement as well as your adult protective services is certainly helpful. for fleshing some of these things out and getting support as needed for these elders. A public awareness. We see it quite a bit, I think, on the tube and on the internet. It promotes consumer education on scams and fraud prevention. And the statement does not impose again any new regulations, but it does aim to raise the awareness and guide of best practices for combating the types of financial exploitation that we're seeing.
Dean, I have a challenging and complicated question for you. How can financial institutions balance protecting older adults from exploitation while ensuring their financial independence and privacy rights?
That is a great question. And, protecting seniors from financial exploitation while respecting their autonomy and privacy is delicate balance. There's no doubt about that. As you can imagine, I have elderly folks myself, and, my dad sometimes I think gets a little angst when I am impeding on his financial well-being and doing it because of my experience. But, on one hand, financial institutions are urged to take protective measures such as the monitoring of the transactions and flagging suspicious activity and involving trusted contacts to prevent that fraud. However, excessive intervention, could lead to financial paternalism and seniors lose that control over their own money. And seniors may take issue with over monitoring if they feel like their financial independence is at risk, not to mention privacy laws like Gramm-Leach-Bliley, which restrict how the financial institutions can share personal information, even when abuse is suspected. Family members themselves can be perpetrators of financial abuse, making trusted contacts a potentially risky option. So, you can see it isn't easy.
You could say that again. I told you it was going to be a challenging question.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let's kind of go a little step further, though, Dean. Let's play kind of a hypothetical. As you
hmm
know, I'm an old guy. I do qualify as a senior citizen.
Yeah.
Hopefully it comes with the wisdom you're supposed to get as a senior. Sometimes I don't know. So do you think a financial institution should have the authority to block my transactions if I refuse protection despite clear signs of exploitation?
Well, you certainly are full of some great questions today, but I think the short answer to that is yes, I do. But here again, going back to my previous statement, I think it's a delicate balance. Even with policies in place, detecting and preventing elder financial exploitation remains a challenge. And there are some major obstacles. Underreporting. Many cases go unreported due to shame, fear, or lack of awareness. And the first thing that comes to me are these dating scams. People are lonely and they reach out online and so they feel shame. They're afraid to go to the financial institution. So we do have underreported. Evolving, fraud tactics. Scammers use, artificial intelligence driven fraud, phishing, romance scams, making detection harder. Certainly. The complexity of elder exploitation. It's difficult to differentiate between, in some cases, legitimate financial decisions and manipulated ones when a senior willingly gives money to a trusted caregiver who's actually exploiting them. And that happens way more than what we would ever imagine. Legal and compliance barriers. Again, privacy regulations certainly can prevent institutions from acting more swiftly in suspected cases of fraud. And then there was one other thing, I'm thinking of BSA, but under section what they call 314B of BSA AML rules allows, financial institutions that are registered annually to share certain information about these types of investigations with other financial institutions, and and BSA gives financial institutions an option on that, Len. But
Mm.
I really believe that they should exercise their option and register under 314B so that they can, protect some of their elder cases by talking with other institutions and giving them a heads up of I'll call it a potential fraud that could be occurring.
Hmm. By the way, I could tell you from personal experience, I have a sister-in-law who was victimized by some unscrupulous guy who was preying on her loneliness and talked her into somehow taking $50,000 out of her retirement account and transferring it to his name. And we
Ooh.
were alarmed. We knew when we found out about it, but it was too late. The harm had already been done. So I think sometimes elders can be particularly suspect to romantic overtures and things because many of them might be lonely. And now these guys are great at getting the confidence of the women they're preying on. And again, I saw it firsthand with my sister-in-law. So it's a
Yeah,
pretty.
yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you there,
That's
Len,
right.
but it is pretty scary. And just one other thought, I'll give you also an experience that we actually had. My parents got a phone call, which sounded like it was a call from one of my kids, and they said they were in jail. It
Hmm.
actually happened to my elderly parents, and of course, we don't live they live in another state, but it was an AI generated call, and it sounded like my son who was making his phone call that said he needed to be bailed out of jail. Well, here we go about education. I had told my parents that, that this type of activity was going on. And so we established a code, and the code is to be used in those circumstances. And,
Hmm.
you know, something simple that my parents could remember. So they remembered the code. And of course, there goes now they were protected because they didn't know the code, and
Hmm.
that wouldn't happen. So they, obviously hung up and everything was fine. But that's how quickly it can happen, Len. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah, I could go on with another anecdote. We got the same kind of a thing when my wife got called, and our grandson was allegedly in jail, and she was very alarmed. She got me right away, and I said,
Mm.
after I talked to the person at the other end of the line, I started suspecting that it was not true. So I said, hold on, let me just call my grandson to see. And my grandson answered the phone, and he was nowhere near jail or anything. They hung up on us
Exactly.
at that point in time. But it's a pretty
Yeah.
scary situation, and as I understand it, it's getting worse. So for our listeners today, do you have any recommendations, Dean?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, certainly, but my recommendations are obviously specific to financial institutions, and of course, based
Mhm.
on context such as asset size, resources, complexity of offerings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think everybody plays a role, including the elders themselves and their caretakers and so on. But many FIs financial institutions are using behavior-based detection systems. But as technology expands, AI fraud detection can review lots of data to identify patterns of suspicious activity on historical behavior. So it does that look back in real time, and it can tell you if somebody's deviating from normal or expected activity. I also think it's a good idea to get involved in groups that meet and work together on fraud. Law enforcement, regulators, social workers, adult protection services, community groups, in an effort to share, certain data and coordinate efforts to mitigate the risk associated. We're going to have to get better at this as we move forward. As I've said, education is extremely important, and it's not just educating the financial institutions. It's educating your customers, your members, and making sure that they're up to speed on the latest fraud techniques. I think FIs can provide an easy to understand fraud prevention hotline or tip to a customer, which is tailored specifically to seniors, and that would be very, very helpful. But last but not least, I think enhanced controls such as fraud alerts, preemptive scam warnings, especially for large transactions or requested transfers to unfamiliar accounts, a foreign account. And, again, large dollar transactions. I mean, I have a limit of $25 on my credit card that alerts me every time a transaction is made of $25 or more. That's because I'm just a little anal when it comes to this stuff and protect it. So it makes me nervous.
Well, better safe than sorry, as they say, right, Dean?
Yeah, that's for sure, Len. Yeah.
So this has been another great topic for our listeners today, especially those from financial institutions. And I want to thank you for your invaluable and informative comments today, Dean. And this is Len Suzio from GeoDataVision.
And this is Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting saying thank you for tuning in to today's discussion. Please let us know of any additional topics you'd like to hear in future episodes.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and GeoDataVision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.